Recovery seems to be a hot topic within the health and fitness industry at the moment. A lot of gyms are setting up saunas, plunge pools, and there's a lot of freestanding standalone facilities that focus purely on recovery. Now, what I want to talk to about today is really, is it necessary? Is it adding more clutter to your weekly schedule? And, where is it beneficial and where may it not be that beneficial? Now, when we have a look at the training process itself, you need, say, 3, 4, 5 sessions a week to really get a good therapeutic training stimulus. Now, that in itself, if you train out at 1 hour at a time, is already 5 hours of your week. If you do bigger sessions, that may be 10 hours a week already. If you're a powerlifter, that may be even more. That might be upwards of 12 hours a week. So when we start to look at recovery strategies, I want to pose a question to you guys. Do you actually think you need it in your training schedule? Do you think it's actually going to provide something that, you're not going to get from training, from sleep, from adequate nutrition and recovery, AKA rest? So to kick things off, I think we need to actually look at the actual training process itself. We need to look at, what we're trying to actually do with the training process. What are the specific requirements that we're trying to get out of it? Where recovery plays a role. And then I want to talk about the recovery process and how to look at it. So looking at, training from a bird's eye view looking down, we want to be inducing fatigue. That is the whole point. Your body will literally only get better and respond to stimuluses that make it tired. So when we're thinking about recovery, we don't really want to be fully recovered all the time. There are periods of time where you may need to be recovered, and we're going to talk a bit about that at the end. But for the majority of the training process, like week in, week out, you need to be creating fatigue. So when you look at a training block, so say you have a 5-week training block and then you have a deload, so 6 weeks in total, that every single week that you're stacking up, you're getting more and more tired, more and more fatigued, but that's the specific adaptation that you're chasing. Like you want that. And I'm going to provide some context in a bit, but you want to get to the point at the end of the block where you're like, I really need a deload week where I have less intensity, I have less volume, and I can recover. Like that's the whole training process. And it's called supercompensation if anyone wants to look it up. But you get worse during your training session. Like you're at the end of the training session, you're fatigued, you're not performing at your best. At the end of a training block, you're also not performing at your best. But that's the whole point, because when you do add recovery into it, aka a deload, you come out of that fatigue cycle and you come out better on the other side. Well, at least that's the theory around it. So the idea for me when I think about recovery is actually more of managing training and the stimulus that you get from training rather than the other things such as, plunge pools or let's just say hot and cold contrast. So I think there's a lot more to be spoken to about the training program before we start to look into these things. Now, let's give some context and some examples. If I was purely focused on building muscle mass, all I wanted to do was get super jacked, had no aspirations of doing anything strength related, and I had another 6-week training program, the goal of that training program would be to stack up volume, as much volume as I can across that training block, increasing every single week so that I'm doing either more reps, I'm adding weights to the bar, or I'm just adding a whole new set. I want to be doing more work at the end of the block than I was doing at the start of the block. Now, as an example of that, say I started out week 1 with 3 sets. By week 5, before my deload, I might be doing 7 sets of a particular exercise, and I just follow the same progression. You could work at the same weight, the same reps, and just add a set every single week. Now, by default, week 1 to week 5 before your deload is going to be very different in terms of the overall volume that you've done, purely just because you've added an extra set. Now, by the time I get to week 5, I'm going to be screaming. I'm going to be so fatigued, and all I'm going to want to do is just take a week where I have less intensity, less volume, and just recover a little bit. So part of the actual training process for building muscle mass is fatigue. You need to be fatigued in order to build and stimulate muscle growth. Now, in order to build muscle, obviously you need to have mechanical tension. You need a lot of time under tension. You need, a hypercaloric diet. There are other factors that's involved in it. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't really be feeling recovered. You should be feeling good enough that you can do another session, but recovery isn't optimal necessarily. Now, if we look at, strength training and powerlifting, for instance, it's very sympathetic driven. Like, we are getting someone to move in a way that's stiff and rigid so that you don't get pushed around by a barbell. Like, your goal is to move as one so that you can squat down, say for instance, in a squat, and stand up in a way that you don't get pushed around by the barbell. Now, part of that is actually having a body that's stiff, strong, and has the ability to create tension. So the question that I ask here for a strength athlete is, do you, during a training block, say the same example, 5 weeks, do you actually want to be recovered enough in those sessions where you feel limber, you're feeling loose, everything just feels great? The reality is, the answer is probably no. There's a certain level of tightness and stiffness that you want to hold through that training block so that you can maintain your position during your main movements. Now, what I'm not saying is that you want to be so stiff and immobile that you can't get into positions, but there's a certain element of stiffness within being trained for strength training and powerlifting. So being optimally recovered ain't the goal. Now, when you look at the difference between building muscle mass and strength, in the strength component, you're adding weight every single week. So ideally anyway, or working to an RPE, but towards the back end of these strength blocks, you're adding the most amount of weight that you can to a bar, and you're going to be screaming for a deload, right? Now, volume and strength have an inverse relationship. So as you're getting stronger, you typically drop off volume. And as you're driving up volume, you typically won't continue to increase a ton of weight. You may just squeeze out some extra reps, or you may just squeeze out some, add in some extra sets so that you get more volume across that training week. So they're very different stimuluses as such. However, both of them require fatigue, and you need to essentially not recover fully until your deload week or a few blocks grouped together to really get the results of your training. Now, if we go a little bit further and we look into, say, aerobic fitness, even if you were training for a marathon, and anyone that's trained or trained for a particular marathon, you'll notice that every single week, or maybe every phase, you will do bigger distances, and you may then combine that with some interval work or some VO2 based work as well. So where you start, so say you did a 12-week prep, say you started running 2Ks, and then week 12, you're running 40. That's a very big difference in the amount of actual output that you're doing. But in order to get better at actually doing a full distance run, you need to increase and push yourself into fatigue, where you have dedicated periods that you come out of that fatigue to recover. That's the whole training process in general. So it doesn't matter if you're building muscle mass, training for aerobic fitness, building strength, you need to have an element of fatigue to push at the adaptation that you're trying to get. Now, the only difference here, so say a skill-based sport, say I was playing tennis or badminton or darts or something like that. That is so hugely skill-based. So in that scenario, this may not be as applicable because you don't really need fatigue to drive the adaptation. You need skill. You need output in terms of your precision. So that is a scenario where it probably doesn't matter as much. But when you're actually looking at training to build muscle, build strength, or, output, you need to have fatigue throughout your training week for, periods of time so that you can recover and get better on the other side. Now, when we're looking at the actual recovery process, where I think, contrast therapy comes into it, or any other particular, say, massage therapy, or any of these Normatec compression cuffs, anything like that really plays a great role in your deload weeks. So think of this. If you've got a 6-week training week and you've got week 1 to 5, you're just escalating what I just previously spoke about. That deload week is your week to get in your recovery. That's the week that you're not really chasing an adaptation. All you're trying to do is, eat well, sleep well, do the little things right so that you can chase a specific adaptation at the end of it. So I personally, when I look at it, I would go, well, where is, from a training standpoint, where is the most logical place that I could place any of these recovery strategies? And for me, straight off the top of my head, I start to think it's your deload week. Now, just to preface this, I love a good sauna. I've been doing saunas probably for the better part of 10 years before they were all the rage, but they are fantastic. You feel absolutely excellent coming out of them. A plunge pool, you feel great. You get such a good dopamine hit coming out of a plunge pool. You feel fantastic. But the question I pose is it actually helping your training? Is it helping you move forward towards your actual goal that you're trying to get? So, there is some literature that will also suggest that, say you've just done a really big hypertrophy-based training session. If you do some contrast therapy within, say, a 24 to 48 hour window afterwards, that it can potentially negate the effects of the hypertrophy effect that you were chasing anyway. So then you go, well, if you're going into the gym to chase the gains, but then you're overly recovering it, what's the point? They kind of, balance themselves out to a negative sum game. So I would just say, if you're looking at putting recovery strategies into your training, you need to pick your times really, really well. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. So say, for instance, I was doing a round robin of soccer or football, or I had a tournament style event for a week. So say I was playing, touch football, and I had, 4 games a day for 4 days, or I was an NRL player that needed to back up the next day for training, or I needed to do something. These are specific periods of time where you're not chasing a training outcome. You're chasing output. You're trying to just be your best. All your training adaptations, everything that you need is already completed. Like, you've built all your muscle, you've built all your strength, your aerobic fitness is great. And you're at a period where you're just maintaining and you're executing everything that you're working towards. Now, this is where something like a sauna or a contrast therapy could be really helpful, because say I just played 4 games of touch and I have another 4 tomorrow. I can get in, I can have a sauna, I can do some contrast. And at the end of that, you feel really nice and fresh and recovered. Now, that is a perfect example of where recovery strategies make so much sense, because you're not chasing training adaptations at that point. It's output. So, it's a really logical way to look at it, where the training process itself in the gym, we're actually trying to induce fatigue. So they're very different outcomes. Now, this sounds like I'm dissing on recovery strategies. I'm absolutely not. I just think that a lot of people don't tick the boxes of training hard enough, getting their training right in terms of spacing, managing intensity, managing load. There are so many variables that people can change. Nutrition, sleep, optimal hydration. Have you even hit enough protein? There are so many factors of training that should probably be looked at and ticked off first, and have a system around it before you start chasing other strategies to improve your training performance. Because at the end of the day, training takes time. There's a significant amount of time dedicated to it, significant amount of resource dedicated. And I want to make sure that I'm giving the best advice. And even for myself, that the time and resource that I put into it, I'm actually getting a return on my investment. I want to be smart and logical with my time allocation, because time is the commodity that we all need more of. So when you're looking at your training, if I can wrap up today with, when you're looking at recovery strategies, you've got to be really mindful and contextual around when you use it. And, you could argue that you could use it during, preps, or you could argue that you could use it during a training block. But I personally would put all of these recovery-based strategies towards the back end of a block when you're in a deload. I wouldn't add any of these strategies in just before a comp if you're peaking, because it's another variable that you don't want in there. And, I love the feeling that you get from it, but if you're really chasing a specific adaptation of muscle growth and strength, you need to be focused with your efforts towards that. Recover hard when you can, but the period of time you spend in the gym, you want to maximize it and get the best return on your investment. So that's it for me today. Hopefully that provided a little bit of context around recovery strategies. I know there's a lot of information out there that can sometimes be, a little bit conflicting. And just, where do you place your efforts? But hopefully this has provided a little bit of clarity. I'll see you guys on the next episode.